things are happening in the world, like the political paedophilia revelations that are happening in this country. They were in my books years ago, like The Biggest Secret in 1998. People are now starting to say, well, hold on a minute. Let's look at what else this guy has said. And we're starting to see the cracks, starting to see some encouragement, some hope that this wall of oppression and secrecy would be breached fatally. At that very time, Sonia Poulton and the community press group headed by this former policeman, DJINN, are planning to do their damnedest to destroy me and what I do. Who benefits from that, Ms. Poulton? Who benefits from that, Mr. Eden? Who benefits is the very system you two claim to be challenging. Emphasis on the claim, by the way. And in the last few weeks, I probably came as close as I've ever come to saying, all right, I'll leave you to it then. All the best. I'm going to live out my life quietly. Do what I want to do. Do some things for me for a change. So freaking tempting, because I could do it, but I won't, because I started a journey 25 years ago, and I'm bloody well gonna finish it, and it will only end when I do. But I am sickened that people who claim to be fighting for justice, fighting for the oppressed, are so full of hatred, hostility, and the need for revenge that they would try to damage as best they can someone who has done more to alert the world to what's really going on than almost anyone else on the planet. And compared with their contribution, I've already done more to alert people to the truth of the world on so many levels than they, Eden, Poulton, the Poulton groupies, and all these other abusers will do if they live to be 1,000. But that's what you're dealing with. Frauds and fakes. And it will massively backfire. So when you have been the biggest donator, massively so, to the People's Voice, when you had the idea to create it, when you gave 6-7 months full time to it, and never took a cent for my trouble, then you end up being painted the villain. That is, if we needed it, still further confirmation that the world is bloody insane. Bloody madhouse. Let me make through these notes. I wanted to cover everything. You know, I talked about banging the heads up as they come up. There's always someone. Well, that's gone on right to the end, because I came back home on March the 1st, as I said I would from the start. And my goodness me, it's a bloody good job I did, because DJINN and related operations were in a poor state due to neglect, not least on behalf of the webmaster, as was. So I've been working with a new web team to turn everything around, and it's just been fantastic. It's turned around really quickly, and we're going to go on doing it because it's being loved again. It's being cared for again. It's being focused on again. But I have been watching from a distance and having me two penneth here and there when I thought it was necessary. And a bookkeeper, a part-time bookkeeper, was appointed right at the start. A person I knew had great integrity and very diligent, very honest, outstanding. And then I heard that she'd been fired by Sean Adler. This was a few weeks ago now. And I pointed out that that wasn't acceptable, and where you're going to go from here in terms of bookkeeping. I then received an email back, which was at the bottom, it had his name, Sean Adler, but had clearly not been written by him. It was actually been written by his marriage partner, a guy called Sinclair. And since that partnership, Sinclair, who's from America, has been given more and more influence at the People's Voice, even appearing on Richie Allen's show. I don't know why, because the guy is absolutely clueless on the information that TPV was set up to communicate. And it was only going to end one way, with someone who had no idea about the media and no idea about the information that TPP is there to put out. It was only going to end one way. And I got this email, it was clearly written by this Sinclair bloke, saying that actually Sean Adler owned the company. It was his company. Well, it wasn't. He was a custodian, and that was known all along. He was only a director because the company had to be set up like that for reasons I've explained. He was custodian. So I got this, and it was that, basically, you're not having any say anymore. And at that point, clearly I had to point that out to people, which I did on my website, because I could see where it was going with this Sinclair bloke having so much influence. And I must say that I've known Sean Adler a long time, but I don't know the Sean Adler that I've seen in the last few weeks since that marriage happened. So I don't know. Maybe you can explain, but I'm not the only one that's seen it. So we come to this point, and I know as much as you do. I understand that he's put the TPB into liquidation, but only he can answer those questions. I'm from a distance now. And, there has been, lots of allegations that money was here, money was there, or whatever. And like it's the machine gun approach. I mean, when you've got a situation where I've been accused of using TPV to fund my cocaine habit, when I actually don't have a cocaine habit, and I have never written a single check for a single penny or moved any money out of the TPV bank account. Even once. Never. Wasn't my area, wasn't my role. My role was content. But they fire these things at you. Another moronic man who needs psychiatric help said that I used the money to buy a house in Islington. Well, even with the donations that TPV got, you don't buy a house in Islington for that kind of money. It's madness. So there's this machine gun approach. But I'll say this. If anyone, including Putin, has any evidence that money went to where it shouldn't have gone, not innuendo, not I've heard, evidence, this is what they need to do. They need to take it to the police, and they need to seek the prosecution of the person involved. And no one will back them more than me if they produce that evidence and take it to the police. But instead, what's happening is that the need for revenge and the need for their hatred to be expressed means that they're just trying to focus it all on me, the guy who never took a penny and put thousands and thousands in to support it financially. Why? Well, I'm the best known person there publicly, so therefore, you know, that's a motivation. Motivation for Sonia Poulton is that I called her out as a diva, and that you don't do that, I must destroy him. But are there any other reasons? Are there any other reasons to try to undermine and destroy the work of someone who is actually exposing, at the very cutting edge, exposing what's happening in the world at a time when so many people in power want me out of the way? Worth asking, I think. Let's just see if I think we're nearly there now. No, that's it. So I say to the people that donated, in fact I'm saying to myself as the biggest donator, thank you for supporting People's Voice. And when we went on air on November the 25th, 2013, we were fulfilling virtually everything that we said we would within months of saying it. It was an extraordinary achievement. But once the vitriol and the campaign of abuse and attempts to destroy it started, it was in a death spiral, which, barring some person coming in and saying, I'll sponsor this, sponsor that, was going to end like it's ended. But, you know when people are putting the greater good first. Because no matter what happens, no matter how they get kicked down, they get up and carry on. No matter how they don't like something that's happened, they get up and get on. When you are not putting the greater good first, but you're just claiming that while using the alleged greater good to benefit you, what happens then is when something happens you don't like, you want to destroy the subject of that, even though it's doing great work for the greater good in terms of communicating suppressed information. And again, I've seen that at the People's Voice, where people, oh yeah, we've got to do this, it's great. I mean, on the 2 days before Sonia Poulton unleashed this campaign of vitriol against me, she was on air going, oh, David Icke, he's wonderful, that's on air programs. But when the greater good is your prop, not your prime focus, then you don't say, okay, it didn't work out, I didn't like what happened, but hey, they're putting out information 24 hours a day. You know, all the best. You don't do that. You want to destroy it. But when the greater good is your focus and something disappointing happens, like what's happened to the People's Voice.
Now, if they will do that, then they will create terrorist attacks using mindless people who have no clue who their real masters are, or who is really in control of their mind. And I'll get to that before I finish. They will do that because if they want to change society in a way that the public would massively resist if it was just openly offered, then they have to create circumstances which change that public perception, so that resistance to how they want to push the world on to this global Orwellian fascist dictatorship state will be reduced. That resistance will be reduced to make it easier for them to bring about what they want. And that the public en masse would resist if they knew what was actually behind all this. And then there's another part of this, which is, if there's a few of you, and as I've been pointing out all these years, the number of people in full knowledge of where this world is being taken and why, and who's actually behind it, is tiny compared with the target population. Tiny. And because of compartmentalization, the will of that few plays out through the system, different levels, with the vast majority of people who are working to play it out without any idea of what they're actually playing out or why, because they only know their little bit in the compartmentalized structure. They don't know how their bit connects to everyone else's bit to create a picture which can be clearly seen in terms of where this world is being taken. And all you have to do is look at the scale of surveillance, the scale of the disappearing privacy, to see that this is not about protecting us from terrorists. This is about creating this Orwellian global state that I've been writing about for so long, and others like Orwell and Huxley in Brave New World were also writing about with extreme accuracy, as it turns out. So this other side of this rapidly increasing number of terrorist attacks and shootings, etc., is because that tiny few have to manipulate a vast target population. And if that target population has unity and has harmony amongst itself, that's very, very much more difficult to do than if you play different factions of your target population off against each other. And when you kind of put the dots together, well, first of all, in the United States, with these shootings and attacks on policemen and police officers, and the way that police officers have treated black people, or white people too, by the way, but black people many, many times. And of course, that's come to the fore in the last few weeks. It's clear what's being done. The American society is being divided systematically. They want a race war. It's blatantly obvious. And if you can have a race war, a war in effect between one race and police, and one race and another race, or whatever, then you have the perfect situation for the few controlling the many. Because you have the target population fighting each other And that allows you to justify things that otherwise could not be justified, like more and more control, more and more surveillance, more and more Big Brother Orwellian state to meet the problem of the race war and the inter-community conflict. And then you move to Europe, and you see the obvious. Look at Chancellor Merkel and what she did in Germany. The obvious decision to allow vast numbers of migrants to come into Europe in enormous numbers, not to protect them from war and conflict like those coming out of Syria. I mean, hallelujah to that. The West has created these conflicts on purpose, the same network that's behind what I'm talking about now. And so, of course, we should look after the refugees of these conflicts that this Western cabal has created. Of course. But that's not what happened. Vast numbers of others were allowed in at the same time who weren't fleeing from such things. And it was calculated. This is why German people were just shocked that Merkel could open the doors and say everybody in. Because what they want is, and there's many levels to why this has happened, and it all leads to the agenda I'm talking about. But one level of it is they want to create a situation of inter-race, inter-culture wars in Europe. And when you've got the head of the French police before Nice saying that France is on the brink of civil war, well, you can see how they're moving it on. And if people want to see where this is meant to lead in terms of the scale of imposition by the state upon basic freedoms and what is called democracy and free speech, then they should look at what is happening now in Turkey. Because this, quote, coup in Turkey, on the face of it, there was an attempt to remove the regime of the president, Erdogan. And that may well be true, but there's another way of questioning this too. And that's the incredible speed in which the Erdogan regime responded to it, clearly knowing it was all coming, and how they have since set about arresting thousands of judges and academics and teachers and others who were not supporters, basically, of the Erdogan regime. And how on earth can you justify arresting that number of people so soon after this, quote, military coup attempt? Where does the evidence come from in that short time to justify this massive number of arrests of people in the country? It doesn't. It was all pre-planned quite blatantly. As a result of this vacuous, vicious, insane man, Erdogan, who serves the interests of the West, not least by supporting ISIS in Syria, he's been given the opportunity, problem, reaction, solution, to purge all the people he thinks are against him. Because Turkey's no longer a democracy. It's a tyranny. It's a dictatorship. And it's being justified by Erdogan on finding a solution to the problem of the coup attempt. And in all these events, this is the reason why, if you read the alternative media, as it dissects these official narratives of these terrorist attacks and shootings, why so many questions immediately start to arise. Why the official narrative has so often holes in it all over the place and contradictions in it all over the place. And why you see these patterns of repeating behavior, repeating patterns of action from one to the other. And when you see them all and you see the recurring patterns, it's quite clearly that these attacks, most of them anyway, are being played out to a blueprint, a repeating blueprint. Now, is that a coincidence? Of course not. Why do we see over and over again people that commit shootings and other attacks in the United States being connected to the FBI? Even the mainstream media in America, here and there, has pointed this pattern out. We are being subjected to a colossal mind game, because it is a mind game, because it has to be a mind game. When there's a few of you and you want to impose your will on the many, you can't impose it on 7+ billion people. Physically, there's too many of them and there's not enough of you. So what you have to do is you have to recruit from the target population and put them in uniform to impose your will on the target population, which is, of course, what happens, why so many psychopathic people are recruited into law enforcement. That's not to say they're all psychopaths, of course not. But there is no doubt a pattern of recruiting psychopaths into these positions who carry out what you tell them without question and enjoy it. This is why there's so many outrageous things happen, like police officers shooting innocent people for no reason. And so, if you don't have the numbers to physically impose your will upon everyone, then what you have to do is impose your will psychologically by getting the target population to think and perceive the world and self in ways that suit your agenda, which will get them to not only accept what you want to impose upon them, but demand it. Save me, protect us, this can't go on. And this mind game, which has been unfolding all this period through the 20th century, the present century and beyond, is now being ramped up like never before. And one of the reasons for that is that, as I know, going around Australia in the last few weeks with some more events still to go, there is without question an awakening going on of more and more people, including people within the system, to the point where they're seeing the world and what's happening in the world in a different way. They're starting to see the dots connect. They're starting to see that actually maybe this is not happening because of why we're told it's happening. This is very, very blatant to me. I mean, I've been doing this for 26 years. I've seen the transformation in the numbers of people who are going, whoa, maybe there's another way of looking at this. Never before has it been at the of the scale it is now, and we haven't seen anything yet. Now, this cabal know that this is going on, and they're trying to lock everything down as fast as possible and get this Orwellian state in as fast as possible. And so we're seeing the whole thing ramped up in terms of events unfolding to get people into fear and into giving their power away to be protected from what they've been manipulated to fear. The antidote to this is two things. One Cui bono, which translates as who benefits? Who benefits from me believing the official version of this event, whichever it is? So when these attacks and horrific happenings are reported, and the official version of what happened and why and who did it is reported, just ask the question every time, who benefits? Who benefits from me believing the official story I'm being given of this situation? And invariably, you will find that the only people who benefit are those that want to get people in fear, that want to justify more Orwellian legislation, that want to go in and bomb more innocent people, and want to push the world further along the road to this Orwellian global state of total control. So that is an antidote immediately every time these things happen and the official narrative is reported. But there's one other, and that's for everyone, whether black, white, Muslim, Jew, Christian, anybody, everybody, to realize that this conspiracy to enslave humanity in this Orwellian global state, which is unfolding so fast now, which is why more and more people are seeing it. It's not a conspiracy to enslave Muslims or middle-class Americans or black South Africans or Australians. It's a conspiracy to enslave all of us and our children and grandchildren, even more so. And we've got to start growing up and realizing that while we allow ourselves to be played off against each other in these divide and rule scenarios, without having the streetwiseness to ask the right questions when these things happen, who benefits, for instance, if we go on buying these manufactured fault lines of divide and rule, then this Orwellian global state will happen. But it doesn't have to. If we realize that whatever the color of our skin or the nature of our culture, we are all in this together, because we together are that target population. Not one bit, not this bit, not that bit, all of us. And if we do those two things, we come together, we put down the fault lines, we create a simple situation and response called respect. Respect for another's culture, but the other's culture's respect not to try to impose that culture on you, and vice versa. To respect someone's religion. I mean, I don't agree with any religion, but if people want to believe a religion, good luck to them, so long as they don't seek to impose it on anyone else. And if we can just find the maturity and the expansion of consciousness enough to live together and respect the differences, indeed celebrate them, then one of the major factors that allows this whole thing to unfold, divide and rule, disappears. And if we can find also the maturity and the expansion of consciousness enough not to accept the official story of everything. Sorry about the noise. The windows are open. Get some air in this place. I should be here at the sun. Anyway, I don't have to. I have been. A lovely place, but warm for me. But if we can find that maturity and that expansion of awareness enough to ask questions of every official narrative, and see if it stands up. See if it goes through that filter of who benefits. If we can do these two things, put down the fault lines, ask the right questions, we will see so clearly, A, what's really going on and what's behind it, and B, we will remove the divide and rule that allows it to go on and go on pushing the world down this dark and dangerous road for freedom, which we've been going along for a long time. And because it's been going along a long time, now we're starting to see very clearly not just the bits and pieces being removed, but basic freedoms now being removed in a way that more and more people are finding hard to ignore and just look the other way and hope it isn't true. It is true. And we need to come together. It may sound trite, it may sound simple, but if we don't come together, if we go on being apart and played off against each other, we go on not asking the right questions when these events happen because, oh, he's a conspiracy theorist, then goodbye freedom. Not for one faction, not for one community, for everyone. Come on. Time to grow up. Time to get a grip of this.
Progressives should, if they are what they claim to be, should be supporting that struggle of the mass of the people against the control by a privileged elite. Instead, those that call themselves progressives have become supporters of that elite, expressions of that elite, and demonizers of those who are challenging it. The progressives have become the new authority, the new big brother, the new censors. And this 2016 has been, as so many commentators are saying, an absolutely extraordinary period, a watershed in global politics, particularly in the West. We've had these supporters of this constantly centralization of global power called globalization, this more and more power of the few over the many. The supporters of this, like Hillary Clinton, gone. We have people like Matteo Renzi, kicked out after a referendum in Italy. We have Francois Hollande in France, gone. Not officially gone yet, but not standing, finished once his term's over. And we've had Angela Merkel, again, classic promoter and supporter of this elite agenda, now hanging on by her fingertips as a result of her open door policy for migrants in Germany, with the consequences that have come from that. So it's been, add Brexit to all this and other things that have happened in Europe in terms of support for so-called populist groupings. And it's been an extraordinary year in which the people have started to stir, to wake up to what's going on. And my God, so far, it's just a fraction of what's going on, but it's a start. And to say, we're not having it anymore. Now, what we need in 2017 is for that to kick on. And what I mean by that is to move beyond the idea that the political system, i.e. voting for Trump or voting for this or voting for that, is actually going to change anything. The political system worldwide is so stitched up in terms of who gets to power and multiple parties, usually two in any country, actually being masks on the same face, i.e. whichever one gets in, the same agenda kicks on. It's to wake up to that and to realize that voting for people to put them in political power, as the system works currently, is just basically moving the deck chairs on the Titanic. And this is the next stage we need to go to, where if we're going to change things, we don't hand that power of change to politicians, whoever they may be, but we do it ourselves. We come together. We put down the fault lines that are there just to divide and rule us, of race, of income bracket, of culture. And we realize we're all in this together, and we need to work together to bring this to an end. Otherwise, we'll be divided and ruled, and it will all go on. Now, the so-called progressives, I've had a big wake-up call. Unfortunately, they never took it, in terms of Barack Obama. He was the man, the political leader. He was going to come in and change everything. Never going to happen. Just another puppet for the puppeteers in the shadows. And of course, the policies went on. They just followed on after Bush, and away you go. And they couldn't see it. And another big thing happened. As a result of investing all that hope into Obama and their people's reputations, oh, this guy's different, they've allowed him to go on basically following the same policies, not least in the Middle East, of Boy George Bush. But instead of the great resistance that Bush got from a large anti-war movement, none of it, basically, under Obama. Just had this free ride from people who should have been challenging him. And I'm starting to see the same things happening with Trump. Donald Trump is the big hope of so many people in America who, well, they don't think, they know that the system run by the elite has just abandoned them, doesn't care about them, just leaves them to somehow survive. And so Trump comes along, and what do political leaders do when they're trying to get elected? They'll tell you what you want to hear, what their natural constituency of support and potential constituency of support wants to hear. And then what do politicians do when they get in? They do as they bloody like, and we're always going to do before. And we're seeing this with Trump. Trump, the idea that Trump was going to drain the swamp. Ludicrous. And so many people in these so-called alternative media fell for it, and still falling for it, because even though we look at Trump's picks for his government, and we see that far from draining the swamp, he's just filling it. So many of those in the alternative media that supported Trump, which is not what the alternative media should be doing, it should be challenging the system, not supporting a puppet of it. Anyway, they are keeping strong or making excuses for him, just as the progressives made excuses for Obama when he went down another road to the one he said he would. So we now have Donald Trump handing over control of the American economy to Goldman Sachs in the form of Steve Mnuchin, long-time Goldman Sachs man. He's now Treasury Secretary. And the president of Goldman Sachs, Gary Cohn, is going to head the National Economic Council. So Trump, classically, as I've just said, was laying in to the elite during the election campaign, laying into Goldman Sachs, and then appoints their men to run his economic policy. Do you think that will be for the people? Do you think that will be populist? And then we've got Wilbur Ross, Commerce Secretary, another billionaire. The whole government's filled with billionaires. Wilbur Ross, 24 years working for the Rothschilds. We have a a multi-millionaire Labour secretary who opposes things like the minimum wage. So the idea that Donald Trump is anti-establishment, is not part of the system, as I said right through the election campaign, is absolutely ridiculous. And what was good about the rejection of Hillary Clinton and the support for Donald Trump was not because of what Donald Trump is. He's not. We're seeing it now. It's because of what people thought he was and what he represented. That is the indicator of where people are at in terms of their view of the world. And that's encouraging, that people are now starting to say, we're not having this anymore. Now, if he sticks to it, there might be some good things that Donald Trump will do. If he sticks to it, I mean, this is President Two Mouths. It says one thing, then says another, then does a third. But if he rejects the hoax of global warming, which is only there as a justification to transform human society, in the way I explain in detail in the books and the world tour, then that would be a good thing. And if he gets better relations with Russia, that will be a good thing, because if Clinton had got in, war with Russia would have been virtually a gimme. However, even on that, we've got to be very careful about assuming. Because the elephant in Trump's probably vast living room is that Trump is Israel's man. Right, wrong, and anything in between. This president is going to be the most pro-Israeli president that I can think of, certainly in modern times and recent times. Anything that Israel want, basically, Trump is going to give them. And one of the things that they want is the destruction of Iran. Some leaked emails sent by the former Secretary of State Colin Powell revealed that Israel has hundreds of nuclear missiles aimed at Iran. And of course, we have had this militarization by Trump of what should be civilian posts, i.e. defense secretary, this guy, this military man, they call Mad Dog Mattis. Someone with a personality that prompts the nickname Mad Dog. Yes, that's just who we want running the Pentagon. And of course, we've heard from Mattis over the years how much he enjoys killing people. It's fun. Yeah, just the man you want running the US military. And then we've got this guy, Flynn, Michael Flynn, as National Security Advisor, and another military man. And they have a common view, which is that they can't stand Iran, here we go, and they see it as the biggest danger. Well, at the moment, Iran and Russia and China are working as one alliance, not least in Syria. And if you go for Iran, then you're going to bring in China and you're going to bring in Russia, unless, and I'm sure this is the part of the plan, they can somehow, by pulling Russia into the fold, oh, we're bosom buddies now, they can break that alliance with China. So just because he's talking, Trump, about getting better relations with Russia does not mean that he's a man of peace. I mean, as I've said, China's been a target for a very long time, and he's not even in office before he's kicking off problems with China. And also mentioning Iran in very unfavorable terms. You can see where the whole thing's going. So this whole deal with Trump as Israel's man is fundamentally important to appreciate in terms of where this Trump presidency is going to go. I mean, God help the Palestinians now. He has appointed a extreme Zionist zealot as his ambassador to Israel, an extreme Zionist zealot as his international negotiator on many things, including the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and situation. And they're not going to make any decisions to the benefit in any way, shape or form of the Palestinians. They will do what another extreme Zionist zealot, Benjamin Netanyahu, wants them to do. And Israel, i.e. the Rothschilds that created it, have an agenda for the world. And now they have the vehicle in the White House or Trump Tower or wherever he sticks himself to push that on. You'll note how much more belligerent Netanyahu and the Israeli regime have become since Trump won, because they know their man is in power, or soon to be so. And we have Trump saying that the American embassy is going to be moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. That is extraordinarily provocative in terms of Arab countries and the Palestinians. And that he will recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Ditto. And so when you look at the Trump appointments, we have the American economy now taken over by Zionists from Goldman Sachs and Rothschild employees. And we have in the Pentagon and as National Security Advisor, two people who are vehemently opposed to Iran, which Israel want to target. And those that follow things closely will know that when the totally extreme Zionist-controlled organization called the Project for the New American Century published their list of countries in September 2000 that they wanted to regime change. And of course, the people that wrote that document then came to power with Boy Bush and started picking off those regimes in that list. Iraq, Libya, Syria. Also on that list was Iran. So that is very likely to be a key word in the Trump administration, Iran, and all that comes from that. We need in 2017 to start to move our perceptions of everything, I would suggest, beyond the political system to that which is behind the political system, which dictates to whichever leaders in power, whatever colour rosette they may wear, whatever name they may call themselves, and realise that there is an agenda beyond politics, which the whole political system is just there to camouflage in so many ways, that works through politics, through banking, through the corporations, through big biotech, through big oil, through big pharmaceutical, all these things. And they're working out and playing to a global agenda, which I've been exposing all these years. And again, what was in my books 20 years ago is being read on the television news. Why? Because there is an agenda. And if you can access that, then you can quite comfortably predict it in theme and often in detail where the world's going to go. Because unless there is an intervention into that agenda to stop it unfolding, then it will unfold and you can predict the future. The whole point of what I do is to alert enough people that this is what's happening, so there is an intervention. And this is why I say 2016 could well be the end of the beginning. The beginning being the initial perception that, hold on a second, the world's not run by those we think it is. And the vast majority are having their lives dictated by a ridiculously few people. 2016 has also seen, say, a realignment, a reevaluation of what is called the alternative media. Because for me, alternative media is about exposing what people wouldn't normally hear and normally see and know about, and exposing this system of hidden control that people would normally see. Why? Because they aren't supposed to see it. But we have had in 2016 a significant part of the alternative media supporting Donald Trump and actually becoming little more than a public relations promotion operation for Donald Trump, who not only won't drain the swamp, he's in it. And I think that's deeply sad. And when you reach the point of a few days ago, where I saw an article on some alternative sites written by apparently an alternative journalist that was listing all the disasters that have happened in America after decisions had been made that were perceived not to be good for Israel. The whole thrust being that God deals his wrath upon those that don't do what Israel wants. When you see that coming from an apparently alternative journalist and put out on some alternative sites, then you know that there is a re-evaluation necessary in the alternative media about what is alternative and what's just not even mainstream light, just mainstream. And it's this part of the alternative media that won't get pulled in to the game that they desperately, desperately want rid of. And that's where the whole fake news thing has come from. And what you're going to see in 2017 is more and more extreme efforts and extreme decisions and impositions to block the circulation of information challenging the mainstream narrative, be it the mainstream media or mainstream politics. Because what if you like, the populism of 2016 has shown, is the power of information when it's put before people. And this is why when you're involved in a perception deception, which is what all this is, you must control the information that people receive, so their perception of everything is the perception you want it to be. And this alternative media, in all its forms, has circulated information, has circulated other ways of looking at the world, to the extent where it is impacting upon the world through the changing perceptions of people and how they see the way things operate. And it's sad to me that significant parts of the alternative media, not least in America for obvious reasons, have got caught in being lassoed back into the system by supporting a particular candidate on the basis of something he's not. So what the genuine alternative media needs is support from as many people as possible in the face of this gathering, and it will gather further, censorship. And beyond that, let's move to the next stage of this awakening to the world, which goes beyond politics and believing that's the way to change anything. It's there to make sure nothing for the better can be changed. And start to realize that we, 7.4 billion people, have the power. We have that power dissipated and diluted by being played off against each other down the fault lines of religion and race and income bracket, culture. And we have that unity fractured, that potential unity fractured by people getting pulled into the belief systems that the system wants us to believe in. Like politics can change anything. Vote for this party and it will be better than this party. Because we need to stand up together now and stop acquiescing to this edifice of tyranny, this global control system. Because if we leave it where we are now, then it won't really change anything. But if we kick it on and say, okay, not only are we voting for Brexit because we don't want bureaucrats to control our lives, not only are we voting for Trump under the illusory perception that he's anti-system, but we people are going to stop cooperating with the system that's controlling us, because it can only control us with our cooperation. That's why divide and rule is so important. Get us fighting among each other so we don't in unity say, we're not having this anymore. Because one clear fact of history is this: if we will take it, they will give it to us. Let 2017 move us on to the next stage, where we take control of our lives, not through some politician, but directly, by coming together and refusing to cooperate with that wishes to enslave us. Do that, and a year from now, we'll be a lot more free than we are now, today. It's just a choice. 7.4 million, billion rather, handful, controlling comparatively. I think I see a way out of this, and it's time to take it. I've been saying over the years that 2016, 2017, 2018 are going to be crucial years in deciding which direction this world, this human society actually takes. And when you look at the information that I will present over 9 hours at each of these events, and how it connects the dots between a fantastic number of subjects that on the face of it wouldn't connect, but do fundamentally. When you see that put together and then you play that across current world events, then the suggestion that 2016, 2017, 2018 are crucial years for the future of where this world is going becomes crystal clear. I've been exposing now since 1991 the hidden hand network that controls all aspects of human society from the unseen. Controls governments, banks, corporations, the mainstream media giants, and so on. And it's not doing that for fun. It's not doing that for a bit of a laugh. It's doing that to achieve a specific end that it has worked towards for a fantastic amount of time. It's not something that was decided 5 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. It goes way back, and there are reasons for this. And the goal all along has been to create a global, Orwellian, centralized dictatorship, dictating to and controlling the lives in detail of every man, woman, and child on the planet. It involves creating wars specifically to transform the target area of the war. You invade Libya, you invade Syria, you invade Iraq, you transform the nature of that society. You create a world war, you change the nature of global society. And as I've been saying, writing for a long time, the plan of this hidden hand is to create a third world war involving the West against Russia and China, to create such catastrophe that people are then open to the solutions that follow, which are the very world that this hidden hand has been working towards from the start. And the reason the talks take all day and involve something like 2,000 images, illustrations, is because there's so many dots to connect. And they include, this is something I focus on in the talks a great deal in the books, they include the nature of reality itself. Who are we? What is this reality? And more to the point, connecting into the hidden hand, why is that knowledge systematically kept from us by control of mainstream science and mainstream media? It's because we are not who we think we are. That which we give a name, a life history, a family history, a racial history, a cultural history too, is merely an experience which the true I, the infinite I, the eternal I, pure awareness, is experiencing in this reality. A reality which, in terms of that which we think we see, is a tiny, tiny, almost laughable range of frequencies that we call visible light. Everything else beyond that is denied us because we cannot decode the frequencies outside of that one, which we call the world. There's a reason, a massive, fundamental reason, why that knowledge is kept from us. Because for the few, and it is a few compared with the global population, to control all these billions, those billions have to be kept in ignorance of their true nature, their true self, and their true power to dictate their own reality and their own experience. So what I do in the talks is bring all these elements together and show that they all fit into a coherent whole, a coherent story, which explains the world that otherwise seems so random, so bewildering. And obviously, as I go into different countries, I bring in aspects of that country into the presentation. But what is so compelling and so fundamentally significant is that although the detail here and there may change, in all the basic themes, everything in the talk and the presentation applies to every single country, no matter what its history, no matter what its culture, no matter what its background. And like I say, these next few years, including this one, are so vital to heading off what is planned. And what is planned is beyond even the comprehension of most people who haven't looked into this information. It is so fantastic. It is so far from what people in general think is happening and where they think we're heading. It's time for humanity to come together and sort this nonsense out and stop the tiny few controlling, dictating to, making suffer the vast majority. But to do that, first, we need to know what's going on. At the end of these all-day events all around the world, people there will know what's going on. Sean Adel was increasingly neglecting DJINN to the point where, until I got a new web team in very recently who are doing a fantastic job and turning it around very quickly. But until that point, DJINN and David Icke Books were heading towards a situation where they were going to cease to exist in the not too distant future. And all the work that I've done, all the effort, all the abuse, all the ridicule of the last 25 years, quarter of a century, was going to, in effect, come to an end. And that contribution to TPV by paying the director's salary while getting increasingly nothing back for it was only part of the contribution. When, in the run-up for TPV going on air in November 2013, I asked for monthly donations of £1, £2, £3 to meet running costs. I knew I must be mad Well, they say I am. I knew where the vast majority of those monthly donations to TPV would come from. They would come from people moving their subscriptions to DJINN.com over to TPV. And that is exactly what happened. I mean, I knew it would. But I did it anyway, to try to make TPV work. Not for me. You know, I've always said that I would work full-time for it until March 2014, and then I had to get on with my work, my own work. It was done to give a platform for information and to give a platform to other people. So DavidIcke.com, David Icke Books, provided enormous, the biggest contributions to TPV in ADL's wages and in money that was lost to DavidIcke.com, to the point, because DavidIcke.com has such a massive traffic that the cost of running it is enormous, and therefore the loss of that money was one of the contributing factors to DavidIcke.com facing the end in the face, until we've now turned it around very quickly with decent people involved. Then I heard by accident, relatively recently, that Sean Adel was running the TPV website off the DavidIcke.com servers, and thus DavidIcke.com was paying for that as well. And then I moved to London, to Wembley, for 6-7 months, staying in Richie Allen's spare bedroom and meeting the living costs of 2 places. Again, that ran to an enormous figure over the period of time with everything thrown in. Now, put all that together and you are looking at a very, very large sum of money that went from here to the people's voice. And when people who donated are saying what's happening and what's this, what's that, well, as the biggest single donator, I'm with you. I want to know these things too. But let me give you some background, because there are people like a brief presenter called Sonia Poulton who are seeking to use TPV to destroy me and my work. I'll get to that as we go along. The irony is that she did take money in wages from TPV at the time she was there, and she's attacking someone who, as I've just explained, not only donated all that money by various means, but in all the time that I was there, paying my own expenses, living in Richie's spare room, I never took a cent from TPV. I was the only full-time person there who did not receive a cent, the only one. And the irony is, in this inverted, insane world, that having done all that, you end up getting painted the villain. Unfrickin' believable. But having observed the world for 25 years and noted its extreme level of madness, maybe it's not unbelievable. So, let me give you some background to TPV and how we got to where we are, as much as I know about where we are now. I had the idea in, I think it was May 2013, to try to create a media platform that would allow suppressed information across the range of subjects to be communicated 24 hours a day. So it wasn't just covering Europe and Britain, it was covering the United States and the entire world. And I did this after reaching a point of giving up, really, on ever getting this information out through the mainstream media. So the idea was, well, let's create our own then. And like I said earlier, from my point of view, the idea was for me to help get it started, and then in March 2014, go back to my own work, because I'm preparing for the Wembley event, and that's 10 hours of information, and my goodness me, it takes a long time to do. You can't do other things all the time and pull that in as well. And the last thing I wanted to do was to spend the rest of my life involved in a media organization. You know, I work alone, that's what I do. And my goodness me, I will from now on, I tell you, after my experience, which I'll get to. My role in TPV has been content. It was from the start. And I can tell you, when you have a blank sheet of paper, as I started out with, and 24 hours a day of programming, 7 days a week ongoing to fill it with, then that's a massive task in itself. Sean Adel ran the, if you like, the business side of things, and with others who came in and were employed. And I was a director of TPV with him for a short time, and then stood down. You know, what's happening, and I'll get to this, but what's been happening with TPV is people with great malevolent intent have been machine gunning allegations in all directions, and knowing that for some people, naive people, that they would stick. And they'd be, oh no, there must be something. Well, it was like, oh, why has he stepped down as a director? Well, here's why. We did not intend from the start to come under the regulator in Britain, the media regulator called Ofcom, because we were an internet station, and thus it's a very grey area. It still is, about whether Ofcom has regulation over internet stations, but it's claiming it does. And it was an organisation created by Tony Blair, so you know that's how bad it is. And there was a guy came, his name was Welsh, and he went off on one. He was a volunteer. He was asking for some expenses to do this or something. I don't really recall it. I wasn't involved in it, but that's what I'm told. Anyway, he threw his dummy out the pram and off he went, and then has been trying to damage the station ever since. I think from the moment he got home, really. Anyway, it seems that he and others actually contacted Ofcom and said, what about this TPV? They shouldn't be doing this without your regulation. And then when Ofcom, as a result of all that, contacted us, we had to come under Ofcom regulations. Otherwise, we would not have gone on air. They would have stopped that. And given that people had donated, that was not going to be an option, not going on air. And then the same bloke who kind of said to Ofcom, what about this? Then criticised us for coming under Ofcom regulations. So I tell that little cameo story because that is the extraordinary mentality of those who have worked so hard to bring TPV to an end. And if they'd only give a fraction of that to making the world a nicer place and a freer place, then we might actually get somewhere, but that's not where they're coming from. Now, as a result of coming under Ofcom regulations, one of them is that a director of a media company cannot appear on air and be a regular contributor. And as the whole idea of the People's Voice was to put out suppressed information, for me, after a quarter of a century of researching it, to be barred from actually appearing on the station was ridiculous. So I stepped down so that I could appear on the station. There's also been a question, which I completely understand, of why the People's Voice was set up as a private limited company. Well, this is the reason. The idea from the start was to create a non-profit foundational trust. And accountants were asked to set that up. However, what happened is they came back to us and said, well, we can set it up, but the rules say that if you are a non-profit making trust or foundation that is receiving the tax benefits of that, then you can't be political. And if you can't be political in the widest sense, there was no point in TPV's existence. So we were left with the worst of all worlds. That was a company that was private limited, which is the only way we could be political, the accountants told us, and had none of the tax benefits of being non-profit, even though we were non-profit. And the business rates at the Wembley location alone was something like 32,000, maybe a bit more, a year. And being a non-profit foundation would have saved us that. So no one wanted to be that more than me. And so we started putting the People's Voice together. And it was a fantastic achievement. Because of the donations in the summer of 2013, we, one, needed to get on air quickly to justify that. And B, all the time we weren't on air, the potential for raising money in advertising and sponsorship for running costs was being lost. So we had no choice but get on air as quick as possible. And the achievement was fantastic. To take a battered room, or two rooms, and turn that into a television studio and newsroom and a production site for a long list of self-created productions, including the band, which gave musicians and comedians a stage to be seen, who most of them wouldn't get that stage otherwise, and I know that it's benefited their careers of a number of them greatly. And we were doing all this and were achieving what we set out to achieve. And the running costs to achieve that were massive. I mean, when you take into account that the system, the computer system that played the programs out, and without which we couldn't have done what we did, because you can't do an operation like we were doing, 24 hours a day of programming, and not have it much of it automated, the non-live stuff. That, plus turning a battered room into a television studio, and then all the equipment that went with it. I mean, there you're talking, from what I saw, you're talking up in the 80,000, 90,000 pounds just for that, before anything else. And when we went on air in November 2013, I think it was the 25th, the monthly running costs for wages of full-time people, but not me, the cost of rent, the cost of business rates, the cost of power, the cost of all the streaming of the programming 24 hours a day, that was running at £50,000 a month. And clearly you couldn't go on like that unless you brought in advertising and sponsorship. And without that, nothing was going to keep TPV on air for that long. I'm amazed it actually got as far as it did into July 2014. But the crucial thing was we needed sponsorship and we needed advertising. And the situation was that the crucial time in the life of TPV that was going to decide if it was going to go forward or it wasn't was the period immediately after we went on air, from November, December, January, February in 2014. And TPV has not made it because that advertising and sponsorship was not forthcoming. And therefore, every month, to keep the station going, more money was going out than was coming in, and that can only end one way. And that's why we had to take the live programming down, Richie Allen's show, because the live programming was the most expensive. You need producers, you need people that are going to run the show, and they're working full time. So that had to go. And eventually this process of more money going out than coming in, like I say, was only going to end one way. So why didn't we get the advertising and sponsorship? Well, two main reasons, especially in that crucial time I spoke about. One is the information we were putting out. When you are challenging a system that serves companies and businesses that have the kind of money that can make substantial contributions to advertising and sponsorship, when you're challenging the system on which they prosper, well, they're not really keen on sponsoring you and giving you advertising and supporting you. And so we were left with small alternative companies, overwhelmingly, that don't have big advertising budgets and do not have the money to make major donations and sponsorship. But there was another reason, and I want to come to that. At that crucial time, across New Year 2013-2014, a campaign of unbelievable malevolence, mendacity, and vitriol was unleashed against TPV and people who work there. And this is how it came about. Sonia Poulton became a presenter of one of the programs on TPV. She's a freelance journalist who's worked in the mainstream media. And she didn't come full-time until, well, couldn't be much more than 10 days or so before we went on air in November 2013. And she was all smiles and all that stuff up to that point. And for a little while after the start. But then, not just me, but many other people started to notice a pattern. And it was one of producers on her program leaving, staff being upset at the way they were treated by her. And it became more divisive when we did a telethon just before we went on air. This was, and because she was not working full-time but was doing her other work, she was not asked to present it. Richie Allen, who was working full-time, presented it for obvious reasons. Now, Sonia Poulton then refused to appear on that telethon, making some excuse about one of the guests, Peter Tatchell, shouldn't have been on the show. But, you know, anyone with a brain looking on saw that she was miffed about not being the presenter. And then it became more and more divisive and more an unpleasant place to work. When you have a situation, for instance, where the presenter of a program is telling her team to have nothing to do with the team of another presenter's program because they didn't like him. When you have people, presenters, complaining that I am doing a paper review every day on another person's program, and therefore that program would get a bigger audience than theirs, then you start to see that you are not dealing with someone who is putting the information and the ethos of the station first. There is another agenda. Anyway, it carried on, and people were trying to, you know, keep things going and, you know, keep the conflict as less as possible, although the atmosphere was horrible. I mean, there were some very nice, genuine people that worked at TPV. But I got to tell you, I have never come across personally more poisonous, self-obsessed, mendacious, manipulating people than I came across in one place at the People's Voice. Anyway, things came to a head when we had another telethon at New Year, last New Year. And it was 5 hours, as I recall. And the first 2.5 hours was Richie Allen. And the second 2.5 hours was presented by Sonia Poulton. The first 2.5 hours of Richie's contribution was bright, it was quick, it was interesting, and it was very positive, very upbeat. But then Sonia Poulton came on, and from my point of view and the point of view of people who were running the station, the show became akin to watching paint dry. It was just four people just talking, and that wasn't what the telethon was supposed to be about. nothing wrong with that if you're discussing things, but that wasn't what the telephone was about. And you know, it got to the point where, you know, how long is this going to go on? So it was then decided, and the producer decided, that there was some moving pictures, a report that Sonia Porton had done, that was supposed to go into that show at one point. So the decision was made, look, you know, we can't go on and on and on like this interminably. So